Welcome to the Fort Vancouver Regional Libraries program, Redistricting Washington State with the League of Women Voters. I'd like to introduce Judy Zeider, who is a former Chief Assistant City Attorney for the City of Vancouver and is now the Chair of the Civics Education Community of the Clark County League of Women Voters. Judy, take it away.
If I can unmute. Thank you, Amy. And I, in turn, would like to introduce Alan Unell, who's going to kick off our presentation. Alan has been a member of the League of Women Voters of Clark County for about a year, and he is living proof that men are welcome into the League of Women Voters. He is a retired engineer and a program manager for Hughes Aircraft Raytheon, where he met his wife, Vokui Hovagimian, while they were building a radar. He has taught mathematics at Northwestern, Princeton, and Rider universities. And after seeing the film Slay the Dragon, he was motivated to learn about redistricting and how to make it more fair for all concerned. And with that, I'll turn the program over to Alan Unell.
Welcome, everybody. So we're going to talk about redistricting, and we're going to give you some advertisements about additional classes that the League of Women Voters will be making available. So before we start, the League of Women Voters, their motto is making democracy work. They're a nonpartisan political organization encouraging informed and active participation in government. We influence public policy through education and advocacy. You can make better choices when you're informed. What we're going to talk about mostly is reapportionment and redistricting. They're a little different. These are the fundamental processes that we strive for ideal representation and to ensure a fair distribution of political power, because we have a representative democracy. Before we get on to the census, let me make sure everybody understands what the words mean. As the Constitution demands, the US Constitution demands a census every 10 years because the population changes over time. And when it changes over time, it's important to change our districts, our representative districts, both in Washington for our representatives and here in Washington for our state legislative and state Senate districts, because the population has moved. We'll get to this a little bit later in the presentation, but in 1962, the US Supreme Court ruled that districts should pretty much all be about the same size from a population point of view. And the reason for that was to make sure that it's as close as possible, one person, one vote. And if you're old enough, you'll remember that phrase. So the we start with the census. So the US Census Bureau is responsible for determining the total population of the United States. And where you live and where you sleep most of the time is where they will record you. Why is the census important? Well, as I said, we allocate or reapportion the representatives. Let me point out, as long as I mentioned reapportionment, that in gonna mess up the year, 35, the Congress of the United States actually set the number of representatives at a fixed number at 435. If we would have kept adding people to the United States and not changing it, we would have hundreds and hundreds of representatives, and they only had 435 seats. So that's what we've got. No, I'm just kidding. We changed the state legislative districts to make sure that they have about the right size, and local governments, school districts and fire districts, they all resized their districts to account for population changes. The US government allocated in 2015 $675 billion to programs across the country based on population. In 2020, it's going to be 2021, it's going to be quite a bit more. Back then in 2015, we received $14 billion. So it's really important to make sure that everybody got counted. And of course, businesses and nonprofits and universities, they all make use of census data in order to know what their populations will look like, who they will serve, and where they will serve. Businesses typically use this for determining where they will locate. The population in each district in 2010 was about 672. It's going to be it'll still be a little close to that, but slightly bigger. My guess is probably in the 720,000 or so range. I think the census estimate for the population of the United States as of last week was about 330 million. So redistricting, we change the boundaries of the district to reflect the change in the population. When they have equal sizes, we get one person, one vote. And I'll talk about how districts worked in Washington a little bit later. So as I said, 435 representatives in Congress. Washington has 10. It's not anticipated that we're going to get more than that this coming year. But if you take a look, these are some estimates. And you can see that some states actually lose representatives. The pink ones lose. The brown one, I think Florida gained 2, Texas gained 3. Oregon is projected to get an extra 1. These are all projections based on the estimated 2020 census. Right now, I know for a fact Oregon only has 5. So big changes coming. How are districts determined? What a great question. Well, on the left side of the page, you'll see we have state legislative districts, and on the right side, we have congressional districts. Well, there are, let's see if I can get the numbers right. There are actually 37 states in the United States that determine both congressional and legislative districts by the state legislature. I should have been doing that. There we are. So 37 states do it by state legislature. I think it is 7 do that by independent. They do the legislative districts by independent commission. I think it's 5 of them do Congress by independent commission. How many is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's 7. And some of the districts, you'll notice here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, the gray districts for Congress, there are 5 of them that do not, 6, that do not have any decision to make because the populations are so small, they only get 1 representative. For instance, Alaska has a population of just about 730,000. And so they only get 2 senators, but only 1 representative. Washington, you'll notice up here in blue in the congressional districts and the legislative districts, has an independent commission to do both. And we'll talk about that in a little while. Here are the members of the commission. Amazingly, the state got them in place and in time. January 15th was the deadline for choosing them, and January 31st was the deadline for the commission to actually choose their non-voting chair. What we have are 2 representatives that are appointed by Democrats, one in the state Senate and one in the House of Representatives, and same for the Republicans. I can't quite see one of them, Paul Graves. So we have Brady Walkinshaw, who was he's the CEO of a company whose name I've forgotten, I apologize. April Sims, who I believe was the Secretary of Labor, I think, for the state of Washington. And we have Joe Fain and Paul Graves, who I believe were representatives some years ago. Can't have registered lobbyists. He's the CEO of Grist Media. Thank you. She was Washington State Labor Council Secretary Treasurer. There we go. Thank you. I have notes going off to the side here. Very good. I don't need the rest of those. Okay, and they vote and they choose their non-voting chair. So let's move on. It's an interesting method, and it is considered an independent commission. Howsoever, 40% of Washington voters don't consider themselves either Democrats or Republicans. So I'm not sure what to say about that, but they're in control, and so this is the system we have. And I'll talk about how we got that system a little later. They have rules to follow. They can't just make it up. So yay for that. They have to comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act, which is actually, the Federal Voting Rights Act is actually stronger in Washington. Parts of it have been weakened by recent Supreme Court decisions, but in the state of Washington, we have pretty much the most important parts written into law. We have to maintain equal population, as I said. The district should be compact, contiguous, and convenient for the people being represented. You shouldn't have people driving incredibly long distances to vote. Of course, we don't drive to vote, but it should represent a compact area. You should think of rectangles or circles. We should minimize the splitting of political boundaries. That doesn't mean Republican or Democrat or Green Party. That means cities and towns and counties. We try and keep them whole as units. We're supposed to try to preserve communities of interest. I'll give you an example. If you have a tribal nation, it might not be a good idea to split them up into many different districts. That would be not preserving a community of interest. And we should prohibit undue favoritism. That's in relation to any particular group or political party. We should provide fair and effective representation and encourage electoral competition. If you were doing this from a Democratic or a Republican point of view, you'd like the district to kind of look 50-50. That way, people's view of particular issues really get represented in a much more fair fashion. Let me stop right here before I get on to what gerrymandering is. Are there any questions? Because I know that was an awful lot of material in a short period of time.
We're not seeing any questions in the chat box yet, Alan.
Say it again, please.
We're not seeing any questions in the
I should
chat
look in the
box yet.
Oh, no questions in the chat box. Okay. Well, okay, we are going to have a quiz later, so pay attention. Okay, gerrymandering. Well, this is a slander. It actually was a slander. Elbridge Gerry, G-E-R-R-Y, you can see me circling his name here, was the governor of Massachusetts in 1812. And he was a member of at the time, it was called the Democrat-Republican Party. Now, you can see that those have split apart over the time, but it was Democrat-Republican then. We also had Tories, I believe. Anyway, he was responsible for signing the bill into law that was the redistricting of the state of Massachusetts. And he had one district that looked like this little edge around here. And when they did that, they sort of locked in state Senate seats for the Democrat Republicans. And the newspapers gave him hell for that. And they called this gerrymandering because his name was Elbridge Gerry. We, in states other than Massachusetts, call this gerrymandering, locking in political districts for political advantage. And I'm going to show you some ways that people can do that a little bit later in the presentation. So good news and bad news. The Republicans are good at doing this. Other bad news, so are the Democrats. Everybody in their turn draws maps for political favor. And typically independents are the ones that get squeezed. Let's see, a little bit more to go. Let me give you some of the tactics for gerrymandering. Cracking, let me just say them and then I'll tell you what they are. Cracking, packing, those are the two most common. I'll just say the names, then I'll define them. Tacking, hijacking, and kidnapping. So cracking is when you have a group of people, probably with a common interest, in a district, and you draw the district map in such a way as that you spread them amongst many districts to dilute their voice. Packing This is also a widely used technique where you take a group of people with a common interest and you make sure that they reside within a district and even win the district, but they don't have much voice in many others. That's also a very common technique. Tacking is to grab a far away district that has a specific demographic that you want included in your district. To hijack is to redraw two districts to force two incumbents to run against each other. And kidnapping is to put significant support into a neighboring district. And I will tell you, there have been horrible instances of this. Even today, there was one in North Carolina from the 2010 census, and it was not at the federal or at the state level. This was in a neighborhood school district level, where the school, the population of the district was about 74% Black, and there were no Black members on the school board. And they were going to redraw the school board districts to ensure that they had some representation on the board. And the last thing the outgoing board did was redraw the districts so that there were no Black representatives on the district. This is 2011 this happened. It was fought by the ACLU in the Supreme Court and took 6 years to overturn. So it's best to do these things right the first time instead of waiting to do it in court. I will tell you there are some other horrible instances. I guess I can give you one of them, is that I actually knew a representative in Congress. His name was Abner Mikva. He's passed away now. He was a representative from the south side of Chicago, and he had liberal viewpoints. And when districts were redrawn at the state level, he came from Chicago, which was a Democratic area. But when they redrew the districts, they made sure that his house was not included in the district. It was moved aside to another district where he had no chance to win. A little vengeful. Let me give you an example of how drawing districts makes a big difference. And it's visual. There's no mathematics involved. You can put your pencils down. Here we have a region. It has 40 red Republicans and 40 red Democrats. You can trust me for this. No need to count them. There's sort of a big city in the middle, kind of maybe Democratic. And you're going to split it into 4 different districts that have 20 people each, because they all have to have the same size. And 20 times 4 is 80. So here are some ways to do it. On the left, we have a Democratic gerrymandered district. And you can see here, one of the districts has 14 Democrats and 6 Republicans. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think that's right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There they 5, 3, 4, 5. Oh, it's really 7. Anyway, another district. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the one with 6. There's District 1. There's another district. 14 Democrats. One other district has 12 Democrats and 8 Republicans. One has no Democrats. This is the so-called packing. Right here, the Republicans have gone through cracking. We've broken them apart. This is packing. And what happened? You wound up with 3 Democratic districts. But you can do it another way. You can draw the districts so that you have 8 Democrats and 12 Republicans, pack the Democrats in here, and then crack them on the outside. And you wind up with 3 Republican districts and 1 Democratic. Are either of these fair? You're supposed to say no. Okay, here's a district in North Carolina. It's the North Carolina 12th Congressional District. It is predominantly Afro-American and liberal. This district was established shortly after the Voting Rights Act in 1965, and it's what's called a majority-minority district. It is not really compact. It is contiguous, but it is a mainly African-American district. And the law allowed those at that time, still allows those as long as nobody contests them. Here's one in Chicago where I grew up. I know this one. This is Illinois Congressional District 4. It is a It's a Hispanic district. One side is Puerto Rican, one side is of Mexican descent, mainly, and they are connected. Remember, we have to have contiguous, remember that? It's contiguous on the 294 freeway, on the expressway here. There's no houses on the expressway. It's just, but they included it to glue these two pieces together. Again, this is a majority minority district, and it's been that way, I think, for 17 elections for more than 34 years, and they typically elect a Hispanic representative to Congress. Oh, there they are, Luis Gutierrez, Jesus Garcia, there you go. Travis County, Texas. No, let's go to this one. The U.S. Congressional District, Travis County, Texas, in red. In 2003, the majority of Republicans in the Texas legislature redistricted the state. They diluted the voting power of the heavily Democratic county by parceling its residents out. So even today, this kind of stuff goes on. What am I going to say about this? Back in the day, a long time ago, redistricting and map making was done with pencil and paper, like when I was younger. However, today there are computational models that are processed by large computer systems. I would think generally done in cloud-based systems like Amazon Web Services or in the Google Cloud. And they're able to construct a variety of different congressional and legislative districts based on quality metrics that you ask them to evaluate, because you can generate a near continuum, nearly infinite number of maps, but you tell them you want contiguous and you want them convenient, and I want all the rules I gave you, and you can suggest to them, just for fun, I'd like them to be 50-50 Democrat and Republican, and they will give you a list of, here are the ones I found. And it takes very little time. It just takes money for compute power to do this. I would also point out to you, just for fun, if you would like to play with redistricting maps, I can't see your hands, and I know I said we weren't having a quiz, but if you would like to play with them, there is a website where you can do this for free, and the website it's really almost as good as the commercial software that professional redistricting people use. It is called davesredistricting.org, and I'll put that in the chat for you so you can, just for fun, play with that. Now I'd like to introduce Judy Zeiter, who's going to talk about the legal.
Okay. This evening's presentation is focused on redistricting in Washington state. So these three types of gerrymandering, I'm just going to touch on because I want to focus on how Washington state addresses those and what's the relevance to us. So we have three kinds of redistricting issues that generally make it to the courts: racial gerrymandering, partisan gerrymandering, and prison gerrymandering. So Alan, if you could move to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Okay. If you think back to the ground rules for the Washington State Redistricting Commission, one of the first bullet points was the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965. And basically that law came to be during the Civil Rights era. Congress was looking at, it had hearings, it made findings about all the ways, or many of the ways, that voter turnout was suppressed, and there was discrimination in voting practices and procedures based on race. I'll just mention a few. For a time in the South, there were the grandfather clauses, which basically said if your grandfather couldn't vote, neither could you. That was struck down in 1915. So, but then later, more creative practices were put in place. Poll taxes, you had to basically pay to vote. You had to have property. You had to pass a literacy test. In some of the tests, you had to be able to not only read and recite a section of the US Constitution, but you had to interpret it to the satisfaction of the voting registrar. And then there was outright intimidation, lynching, etc. So Congress had quite a solid legislative record when it adopted the 1965 Act. Section 2 of the Act prohibits voting practices or procedures that discriminate on account of race. And then Section 5 has a provision that requires covered jurisdictions to get a federal preclearance to change their voting laws or practices. And Alan, if you could show us the next slide. Okay. Here we have some of the diagram is that some of the states or parts of states that had to get pre-clearance. And I just want to make a note, although Washington State isn't one of those, the Deep South was not the only place some of these practices were found. And you will see that New York, Vermont, and some of the, and California, areas of those states, and Florida, were subject to the pre-clearance requirement. And some of the things they looked at were, of course, these tests or devices to restrict voting, and also low voter turnout or registration. They look at the history of African Americans not showing up to vote. And then along came the Shelby County versus Holder case, where Shelby County, I believe it was Alabama, challenged the pre-clearance requirement. And the upshot of that was the US Supreme Court found that the pre-clearance formula that triggered that requirement, or the formula in Section 4B that triggered application of pre-clearance, hadn't been updated in 40 years. And we're still using data from the 1960s. And Congress had a number of opportunities to have hearings, investigations, to update the formula, but that did not happen. So the court basically said you're using outdated data and you cannot enforce the pre-clearance requirement. It's still there. And there is a bill pending in Congress, HR 1, the For the People Act of 2021. And one section of that would require or declare that Congress should conduct investigations and evidentiary hearings to bring the Voting Rights Act up to date. Now, so as of 2013, pre-clearance went away, and I believe there is a feature here. Alan, can you stamp? There we go. So pre-clearance is not available as a way to enforce voting rights at this point. However, that doesn't mean that the whole act is out of commission. And the next slide will have an example of that right here from almost our backyard. City of Yakima had 43% Latino population, but no one from that community had ever been elected to the city council. This was challenged in 2014 by the ACLU and some local citizens. The upshot of that was that the court found, yes, indeed, this system violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Voting Rights Act. I'll say that slowly. And as a remedy, the court and the litigants agreed upon going to a council district system. And if you show the next slide, there we go. Divided the city into 7 council districts. I think Yakima elects its council elects its mayor. So these are council districts. At the next election, after the districts were set up, 3 Latinos won positions on the city council, all women. Cost to the city, about $3 million for this litigation. So Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is still alive and has had recent applications right here in Washington State. And by the way, there's also a state Voting Rights Act that in part enabled Yakima to divide into districts, because at that point, or prior to that, there wasn't the state legislation that allowed them to do that. So next slide, please. All right. Alan mentioned majority and minority districts, which basically are ones where the majority of the population belong to a minority group, regardless of whether it could be African American, Latino, whatever. And this is a tricky one. The state commission has to comply with the Voting Rights Act, but when it comes to taking race into consideration, it really has to thread the needle. It has to be conscious enough of race so minorities can vote for a candidate of their choosing. They're not precluded from doing that by rules and regulations on voting. But it can't be so conscious of race that the redistricting runs afoul of equal representation by population. So I won't go into detail on that, but it's a balancing act. Next slide, please. Okay, then there's prison gerrymandering, and this occurs or has occurred at times when a state will allocate districts or population in districts by counting prisoners, prison population, to where they are incarcerated, whereas others will allocate prisoners to their home addresses. I'm not going to go into detail on this one, but if you'll see in the next slide, Washington has addressed that issue head on. Right now, or as of 2019, the state adopted a law that says the Redistricting Commission has to deem persons residing, persons in prisons, that they're residing at their last known address rather than in the correctional facility. For example, if someone is a Seattle resident and they are incarcerated clear over in Airway Heights Correctional Center, they are counted for redistricting purposes in Seattle, not in Airway Heights. So, and why this doesn't tip the scale for districts to a huge degree, it can make a difference in terms of how a district is drawn if prisoners are counted in the prison rather than by their home address. Okay. partisan gerrymandering. This is another sticky wicket. The federal courts have been very uneasy about wading into this in any depth. Even back as far as 1946, Justice Frankfurter warned that courts ought not enter into the political thicket of partisan gerrymandering. Fast forward to the present day, and I would say the federal courts have backed out of that almost completely. Let's move on to the next slide here. This is an example taken from Pennsylvania. I like it because I'm a Disney fan, and lots of people had lots of fun trying to come up with descriptions of this one. The Pennsylvania legislature, at that time controlled by Republicans, and again, Republicans and Democrats can be quite good at this, but in this case, it was the Republicans, came up with a redistricting plan through the legislature that essentially gave most of the seats in the state to the Republicans. And this particular district, I like goofy kicking Donald Duck as the best description. And clearly it's not compact. Parts are contiguous, but in a very strange way. So if you could show the next slide. This shows graphically kind of the overall effect of this redistricting plan, whereas you had only 44% of registered voters were Republican. Under this plan, the Republicans ended up with basically 77% or 13 Republican controlled districts. So it really skewed the outcome of the election in favor of one party. This went to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. They ordered, based on the state's constitution, that the maps have to be redrawn. Republicans appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, and finally the Supreme Court declined to review the Pennsylvania court decision, and the maps had to be redrawn. And I believe these were the ones that were in control in this last election. Next slide, please. Okay. Finally, this culminated in 2019 in some challenges to political gerrymandering in North Carolina and in Maryland, and by a very close margin, 5-4, the Supreme Court basically said, we're not going into this thicket. We're not going to have, we're not going to dictate what formula should be used to balance the political interests, and your remedy is not in federal court, which is why the gerrymander or salamander is kicking the can down the road, or at least over to the states and to the state courts and legislatures. So that's where we are now. And that's why our state redistricting commission is so very important, because in keeping with this decision, our remedy or the answer to gerrymandering and balancing partisan interests is now in the hands of this basically bipartisan redistricting commission. And with that, I will turn the program back to Alan.
Thanks, Judy. This is probably a good time. Are there any questions?
We have two questions, one for Alan. How long has Washington been districted by, excuse me, the Independent Commission?
Oh, well, I was going to tell this story later, but I can tell it now.
Okay.
There's a long story. In 1898, when Washington became a state, the Constitution said, make the districts according to the population, period. So that's not too much guidance. And so they kind of drew districts that were geographically based because the people were kind of spread out. And that worked for quite a while until the 30s and 40s when it didn't work anymore. And by the time we got to the 50s, the legislature at this point was drawing the maps. By the time they got to around 1955, District 10, which includes Columbia County, had 18,000 and a little bit residents. And District 30, which included Seattle, had 154,000. And so comes 1962, they find that they're in violation of the Supreme Court ruling, and they had to change it. And so what they did was in the mid 60s, this is a little plug for the League of Women Voters, Mary Ellen McCaffrey, who was a representative, and Gordon Slate and several, and Dean, what was his name, Judy?
Dean Foster?
Yeah, Dean Foster, who later became governor, Republican governor of Washington. They all got together and they drew the maps. And people liked them. The legislature liked them. They voted them in. But come 1970, they still didn't have a process. All they had done was pick a bunch of legislators to do it. So in 1970, they had this brainstorm and it said, maps, geography. We'll hire a geography professor. And amazingly enough, they did from the University of Washington. And this person drew maps and they voted them in and said, good enough. Comes 1980, they still don't have a process. And so they say they're kind of at a loss. And so they said, let's pick 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans from House and Senate, and let's see what they can do. And that's the commission we have today. And within 90 days, those 4 people got maps. That's actually record time for them. That's paper and pencil time. So when they did that in 1983, it was put into law. We're going to have that commission because everybody was so pleased that they got it done. And that's where we are today. I will point out that the League of Women Voters keeps promoting legislation at the state level to actually expand the commission to be bigger and to include more citizen representation. Remember, we've got 40% independents. I hope that answers it.
Next question. Thank you,
Next
Alan.
question.
Judy, for you, do prisoners in Washington state have the right to vote?
That is a wonderful question, and I just happened to be looking at a bill today that addresses that. Actually, in Washington, you have to be convicted of a felony to lose the right to vote, and you can have that right restored. And right now there is legislation pending to make that restoration of voting right automatic as soon as you are released from prison. Right now, there are some hoops one has to go through to re-register, to reapply. In some instances, you may have to pay some fines and penalties before you can re-register to vote. So yes, prisoners can vote. And actually, in this last election, the county elections office placed a ballot drop box at the jail so that those who weren't disqualified from voting could vote and drop their ballots, or have their ballots turned in this drop box.
Thank you, Judy. I have one more question for Alan, and then we'll go on. Alan,
Sure.
Does a commission such as Washington's ever stalemate at 2-2?
It's never happened. It's never happened. And wait, it gets better. The legislature actually has to vote to accept the maps. Remember, we've only done this 3 times. They have to vote to accept them. They can overturn them, I think, with a 2/3 majority. And even then, they don't get to change it very much. That's never happened. So I think they're so grateful to get maps that they vote them in. And no, the commission is never deadlocked that I know.
Thank you. That's our
Sure.
questions for now. Thanks.
Okay, so let's continue on. So remember, Washington State is supposed to provide fair and effective representation. Let's go to the next one. And somehow, or we could just be stopping there. Okay, this is the rah-rah-rah part. Government works if we participate. It's really important. So I've sort of actually covered this. I did this already. There's the Constitution, the Citizens Commission. The League of Women Voters kept getting initiatives passed. They did it once. They changed the districts. I don't think we have to do this. Okay. Voters amended the Constitution to include the commission. Again, here's the commission. See if I have anything else to say about them. Not really. Washington State redistricting rules, just review those again. Have to comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act, maintain equal population, compact, contiguous, convenient, minimize political splitting of counties, townships, whatever, preserve communities of interest, prohibit undue favoritism for parties or groups, provide fair and effective representation, and encourage electoral competition. Well, you're probably wondering about the timeline because that census thing was supposed to be ready like end of last year, remember? Well, the deadline for appointing the commissioners was January 31st, and yay, that's done. March 31st was the statutory deadline for the Census Bureau to provide redistricting data to the states. Bad news, as of a couple days ago, they said maybe September. Not good. There's a reference down here on the slides. I can't see it. Whoops, I didn't mean to go there. I just can't read it. But there's a reference down there for when that's supposed to be, where that came from. May and June and August and September are times when there's going to be testimony to the commission. Okay, now this is an advertisement, but it would be really important if you're not happy with the way your district is drawn or the kind of representation that you're getting with the way it's drawn, this is your opportunity to talk to the commission. They really want to hear from you. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. November 13th is the state constitutional deadline for the Redistricting Commission to adopt the revised congressional and legislative district boundaries. And the legislature has 30 days to amend it, which I believe they have never done. So let's talk about testimony and testifying for just a minute, because the League of Women Voters is offering a class in helping people craft their testimony and get it ready to deliver to the commission. And this is it's a good experience for developing testimony to any organization. And so I would encourage you guys to think about it. Testimony is a declaration or statement given in evidence. It is a document that is written, and the content of what will be said in testifying or is also submitted in writing. And that's the way it's going to be for the Redistricting Commission. They will want a written copy of what we write or what you write, and they want to hear from you if possible. Here's an example of what testimony could look like. Oh, Patricia Whitefoot, and she's written this nice letter, and she has some information on who she is and why she has credentials to actually talk about the issue. And then she has a particular issue, and then she delivers some facts and data about whatever it is. This is, of course, unreadable, right? Some facts and data and why it's important. And then way at the bottom, she asks people, here's what I want you to do because of all of the evidence I've given you. So the components of effective testimony: establish your credentials. Here I am, I live in district, I'm in 18. Identify the critical thing that you think is important. Tell a story why this is important to you. Give some evidence, and here are some consequences of what happens if you don't change it the way I'm suggesting. And then make sure to ask, please change it this way for all the good reasons I've given you. That's what testimony is. And if you like, this is a hand to help us remember how to deliver testimony It's the handy guide. It couldn't get cuter than this, could it? These are the credentials. You introduce yourself on your thumb. The critical point, what is my important issues on your pointer finger? My personal impact, this is why I care about this issue. My story, tell the story. Give evidence for your story, and then don't forget to ask them what you want them to do. Okay, credentials, critical point, personal impact, evidence, and what your request is. So with that, let me advertise that on March 6th and 20th, we're holding a class. The class is actually comprised of both sessions. They're 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. These will, of course, sadly be Zoom meetings instead of in person with donuts. They are Zoom meetings, and here are the topics we're going to cover. Redistricting, what is testimony, the lenses through which you can view populations and boundaries. And there are many. There are economic, there are political, there are age-related issues, industrial versus rural versus township, all kinds. How to testify, how to write your testimony. We actually give you draft documents so you can think about what your testimony could be. And then we actually go through practice sessions with you to help you, coach you, so you're as effective as possible. I will point out, remember, this is the League of Women Voters. We're nonpartisan. We have no interest in what your testimony is about. That's for you. We only want to make sure that you are as effective as possible when you deliver this to the commission. So here, if you have questions about it, we call it Speak Up School. It's sort of a long Gmail account, but it's LWVCC. That's for League of Women Voters, Clark County. speakupschool@gmail.com, and that's a monitored email. And you can register for the two sessions, Saturday, March 6th and Saturday, March 20th, from 10 to 2 at this long URL, which I think I'm gonna, if it's okay with you, I'll put it in the chat. So you'll have it. And these are just some references, which I don't think we need to go through. Okay, so let me stop there and ask if, what? Oh, this class is, of course, free. This is a public service from the League of Women Voters. So, thank you. Are there any more questions?
One person asked, how do we learn what our district looks like? And I gave them one reference, which was the website that is the District Finder, that the Washington State Legislative District Finder. Do you have any other ideas for them?
Well, yes and no. You can actually Google. I don't have them here in this presentation, but yes, you can Google Washington legislative districts and Washington congressional districts, Washington Senate districts, and the maps will show up. And I think there they are. Someone has put them in. So
you can at least get your immediate districts like the 17th, 18th, 49th, etc., through the Clark County Elections Office. And I'm certain there are maps available on the Secretary of State website. I just couldn't find that link at the moment. And since this is a library-sponsored program, ask a librarian. I'm not joking. The library is open and online at the moment and can help you find that information.
Thank you. That's all the questions we have in the chat box. If anyone has any other questions, please place them in the chat box.
I'm busy typing in the email address right here. Oh, shoot.
We do have a couple more questions. One is for the library. Will the library be hosting this Speak Up School Zoom session? And the answer is no. that's being hosted by the League of Women Voters. So it will be a similar kind of situation though, because it will be on Zoom. So you won't have to go anywhere. You can attend from your home, it looks like. And thanks, Judy, for the plug for the library. I did drop in the Washington State Legislative District Finder.
Oh, no, that's not right.
App or the website, so you can find your own district and look at it. You can switch back and forth between the two districts or the two types of map for the state Senate and the Congress. So I think there is another question. Well, can you confirm, is it theoretically true that each legislative district in Washington is approximately equal in population?
What?
Here's another question for
I'm
you.
sorry, please do that one more time.
Yeah, I'll read it again. Is it theoretically true that each legislative district in Washington are approximately equal population?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, when you draw the maps, if you want to have fun, I mean, we're quarantined, so we can sit around and look at davesredistricting.org and look at Washington, and it'll show you there the legislative districts and the congressional districts and the Senate districts. And it'll tell you the population of each one. Absolutely. And they're really close. I mean, really close. They're not within 1 or 2, but not very much more off than that. So people are very careful about that. Okay, I'm going to do this one more time.
Another question for Alan or Judy. If the census results are delayed, will that impact the commission's map drawing?
I have an opinion, Judy.
You go ahead.
Okay, hold on. LWVCC speakupschool.org. Oh, no, lwvspeakupschool@gmail.com. Let me do this first because I'm old and I can only do barely one thing at a time. There, I think I got it. Does that look okay?
Okay.
Okay. So the answer is, back in the day, they would never be able to make it. Back in the day when Mary Ellen McCaffrey was doing it, or when you didn't use computers. And you know what? Desktop computers are not really good enough for this. I know in the last redistricting effort, desktop laptops were actually used to draw maps, and they are not good enough anymore. I think if you do this in a cloud-based environment or with a very large server, it is really easy to get sample maps drawn to those particular metrics in minutes to hours. So I really don't think they'll have a problem. Because the only impediment to that is how much money will you spend for computing? And I cannot believe that this would be more than, I don't know, some thousands of dollars to buy the computing time for a few days to do this. So I think they'll do it without an issue. Let me also point out, it's really important for you to talk to them. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was also going to say, it may impact those of us who want to testify, because I don't think very many of us can buy the computing power. And there will be various groups that will be drawing maps and perhaps have those resources. So that may be the impact. But again, there are resources like Dave's Redistricting that you can look at. And the hearings of the commission will be online. And a fair question to them would be, what are you doing to prepare to turn this around as soon as you have the census data? So there are ways to address this. Other questions?
Another attendee asked,
Oh,
how about
somebody wanted to know if Judy or Alan would take questions by email. Probably the best, we could, but I think the best way to do this, if they're I can give my email address. So here, I'll put my
Well,
email.
you've got the, just use the Speak Up School email.
Yeah, use the redistricting, the Speak Up School email.
Yeah.
That's the right one. So questions, let's put that in. Questions go to LWV. I should be good at this by now. God, I hope I got it. Okay, there we go.
Maybe.
Maybe. What, it looks okay.
Okay, there's a question about how about county commissioner districts?
About what?
How about county commissioner districts?
Yeah. Those all get, I think everything gets redrawn. You bet.
Because they say we vote by district and primary, but countywide and election, and we
I don't,
get overwhelmed. Okay.
Okay, that's governed by the, well, that basically the county auditor and GIS people do that. And that's governed by the county charter.
Okay.
That, you know, how many districts you have and how the county commissioners are elected. So that's not a state redistricting commission task or authority through that.
Thank you, Judy. And then are our districts expected to change very much during this redistricting time?
there will be changes because the population in Washington has grown. I think Vancouver in particular has grown. And so I would expect we should expect some changes, I would think.
Yeah, well, the county population is, I think, about 500,000 now. And so it has grown, and judging just by the housing we're seeing going up, we're going to have more people to be counted and accounted for. So yeah, what changes there'll be, I don't know. And the other thing that's important to remember is this is statewide. So the population change in Spokane Valley is, or in Whatcom County is going to affect this. So yeah, just looking at our own maps, our own population isn't enough. It has to be statewide. Oh, great, you found the map.
I did.
Great.
Somebody asked about the Washington legislative districts. Here they are.
Mm-hmm.
Probably do a screen capture of that. And let's see if I have the the congressional ones as well. There they are.
Great.
So we have 10.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions?
Do you know offhand where in Washington the population has changed the most, like up or down in the past 10 years? I guess Seattle area becomes an obvious, but
Yeah.
You can, so it turns out the census actually does, long before they go around to count everybody, they actually do a yearly estimate of the entire country. And they collect all kinds of amazing data. For instance, you can find out how many people don't have health insurance in Clark County at a moment's notice. So I would go to the census, the U.S. government census website and take a look, and they will probably show you population differences over the last few years.
someone else asks, are we getting a new legislative district?
Hard to know.
And then
Well, I think the number of legislative districts is set at 49 by state statute, and it's just a matter of taking the population, dividing by 49, and making sure each district has an equal population. On the other hand, if we had had an explosive population growth, we might get another congressional seat, but then we'd be taking that away from another state, because the number of, as Alan said, they only have, what, 435 seats. So I hope that answers the question.
We have two comments. One, this has been very informative to me. I appreciate your time and effort on behalf of good elections. So there's a thank you to both of you. And then someone else sent in a reminder that we need everyone in your community to be part of the process. Do you know someone you can send and think this is to the entire audience. Do you know someone you can send the registration to? All right, and we just got one new question in. How does redistricting affect how money is distributed to the districts, such as transportation dollars?
I don't think redistricting is a political, is it how to divide up the geography for political purposes. But the census counts population, and that in turn is used to decide how to apportion dollars, say, for transportation and other uses. So, you know, if you're applying for a grant for homeless housing, and you have a huge increase in the population of the homeless, then you're possibly going to get more dollars that way. And so that's where it counts. It's the census data that drives that.
Judy's right. It also is some of the other issues that are used are housing, public house, Section 8 housing is partly determined by that. Medicaid and Medicaid CHIP are partly determined by that. And so those are really important. That's why it's so critical that the census be done accurately, because we don't want our city, county, state to be not getting, we don't want more than our fair share, but we want to make sure that our fair share is delivered.
So that's a great transition to another question that we'll ask if either of you want to comment on. Do you trust the census data collected under the Trump administration? That's an opinion on that you guys can comment on if you like to. You're not required to, of course.
Let's put it this way. A lot of effort went into gathering the data, and perhaps one of the reasons the results are being delayed is that the Census Bureau is trying to double check its numbers, basically check its math and its numbers, so they can deliver the most accurate possible data come September. That would be my assessment. And that maybe delay is inconvenient, but we might get better data if they have that opportunity. And otherwise, I won't comment.
I think Judy's right. I think one of the big impediments, I think it was very easy for people to send in their census forms, and boy, I'm very grateful they did that. That was a lot easier than filling out the paper form and mailing it back. I think with COVID, there was an effect in the follow-up to people where there were questions on their census responses or people that did not file. And I think, I don't know what they're doing, but I would guess that some of that activity is going on. But it's difficult in the pandemic to trace people down. I will tell you that they actually have methodologies for making sure that the homeless are counted as well. So there's they've thought of a lot of it. So I have no reason not to trust the data.
Mhm. Okay. Okay.
And one person made a comment to me. They said they participated in the 2020 census and found a significant percentage of Clark County population is immigrants, and many refuse to participate in the census. Just a comment they made.
Okay,
Noted.
noted, yeah.
But they do count.
Mhm.
No kidding. The census, the Constitution's very clear. Is if you're sleeping here, you count.
Sad.
Okay.
There's a clarification. If the census is delayed until September, will the redrawing of the maps not be started until it's finished?
I don't know when they will start doing that. There is data that they can use to populate the databases that feed the commercial redistricting software now, based on estimates that the Census Bureau put together last year before the census was completed. And that would be it wouldn't be if it was me, I used to be a program manager, I would start on that now and sort of make sure I understand the metrics that I want so that I know how to generate the maps when the real data comes out.
Yeah.
Just saying, it's good to have a plan.
And they are in the process now with the appointment of the non-voting chair. They're in the process of hiring staff. And also on the question of whether the commission is ever deadlocked, it is interesting that the person they chose as the non-voting chair has a very strong background in mediation. And actually runs a dispute resolution center over in, I believe it's Kittitas County. So it appears that this commission is doing what it can to get as ready as it can for the work it's planning to do. So that is a hopeful sign. Okay. I lost sound here. Alan, you're muted.
We have one more question, but this is about the census.
It's not related to the lecture. I was looking at one fellow's background, and he has the biggest bug I've ever seen behind him. It's just incredible, the bug.
Yeah, Mr. Franklin, that is a frightening.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, how are non-participants, this is a census question you might not know. So how are non-participants in the census compensated for?
Does that mean non-respondents?
I think that's what he means by that.
I don't think they're, I would only be guessing. I defer,
That's what they're, okay, then.
but that's just my guess.
Okay, then one other question. How does the Redistricting Commission know who's a Democrat, Republican, or independent for the purpose of fair maps? And oh, by the way, before I go to that, that's a Mason bee in the background.
Friendly bee, thank you.
Okay.
We do not register in Washington
Answering this.
by party. So there's no database, at least with the voting or elections, on party affiliation. I don't know to what extent they would be looking at that. They're going to be relying on testimony. And then, as Alan said, there are databases that purport to identify voting patterns by neighborhood or household, etc. I don't know to what extent they will be using any of those.
If you were going to pay money, I mean, it's not little money, it's big money, to look at the data that's collected through internet access, IP address by IP address in a geographic region. You could get that data, and you can, based on web searches and things that are looked at, you can make really good guesses as to Republican or Democrat. But it doesn't say that it's everybody in a house, but you could guess in a region. And people who do political gerrymandering do exactly that kind of work.
And this commission is
such
not
things showed up in
supposed
the
to
last election.
favor one party or another.
Correct.
Which is why this type of commission was created. It's not to say political considerations won't come into play, but they have criteria to go by, and that can be set aside by the legislature. It can be challenged in court. You didn't follow the criteria. We've not had that happen. So we'll just see how this process evolves. And the best advice we can give is be involved. You can, as soon as their website is set up and operating, you'll be able to, I'm sure, get on their email distribution list, watch hearings online, and so forth. So just stay informed and stay involved. Okay. We have, it looks like by my clock, about 8 minutes left. Are there more questions? We'll be glad to go until 8 if there are questions.
Okay, I think you answered this in the last round, or alluded to it. Does there have to be databases on parties, since we have to give party to participate in the primary? I think they're thinking that we have databases on parties, but we don't. My understanding, the state does not save that information in the presidential primaries.
No, that's it. That's deleted or erased. I can't remember how long after the presidential primary, but it's pretty short time span. Now, the parties can request it during that time span, but just because someone voted one way in that primary doesn't necessarily mean that they're locked in forever.
And that only takes, that only takes people who voted, not just voters. So it's hard,
exactly.
it's hard to determine. Not everyone's a voter. Let's see. Why do some states allow legislators to do the redistricting? Sounds like Washington does it right.
Because there's not, without casting aspersions, it's a convenient thing for them to do, but it does have the look of the potential for not being impartial. And Judy gave a good example of this before, where in Pennsylvania, after the 2010 census, if you added up in one of the congressional elections, I think it was 2014, it might have been 16, the number of votes for Democratic congresspeople exceeded the number of votes for Republican congresspeople by 83,000. And yet, at the state level, the Republicans won 13 out of 18 House seats. Not at the state level, at the congressional level. They actually won 13 out of 18 of the seats, even though more Democratic votes were cast. So that's what happens, is they pack the Democrats into the large cities and then crack them in the other districts as necessary to make sure that there were more Republican majorities there. And that's a good evidence for those terms that we discussed.
Actually, when it comes to congressional districting, the kind of default setting under the federal constitution is that the legislatures do draw the districts within the states. So that's the default setting, that the legislature does it. And over time, states have adopted, a number of states, as you've seen, have adopted a commission form, an independent commission form, and that was actually challenged in Arizona, and the U.S. Supreme Court said, upheld that, yeah, you can use even though the Constitution says legislature, the legislature can delegate that to a commission. So the commission is the new methodology, whereas the legislature doing the redistricting is the tried and true, old-fashioned, traditional one. Okay.
We have one more question. Shelley's wondering if we should be worried in Washington State. Do you see any reason to worry about our redistricting this time?
My thought would be worry is just borrowing trouble. I'm not worried, but and that's why we're here, to encourage people to be involved, because being involved and being active is an antidote to worry. So that would be my response. I think we have a system that works much better than what we had prior to 1983. There could be some improvements, but it's certainly an improvement, and I hope people take advantage of it and testify and follow the process.
That's
If
a
you're
lovely way
thinking
to
about
end it.
an area,
Go
I was
ahead,
going to
Alan.
say, if you're thinking about an area in which you have a concern, not a worry, what a great idea to bring that forward to the commission and let them know. Come to school.
That's a wonderful way, a positive message, and a way to take some action. So I think we can wrap it up this evening. We want to remind you to go to the League of Women Voters of Clark County website and look for their information about the upcoming schools, or check the links that Alan dropped in the chat. And I'm going to say thank you so much for this great information. It's a really important information for all of our voters and anyone who is interested in redistricting, even from not in Washington State, around. It's just great information all the way around. I will say that I'll do my job here and say in the next couple of weeks, we have a couple of programs you might be interested in coming up. Next Wednesday, the 24th, we have a virtual tour of OMSI's current exhibit, The Life and Legacy of Genghis Khan. So we're going to have a tour of the exhibit, and the tour guide will will answer questions. And we also have on Saturday, the 27th, a program called This Too Shall Pass, Resilience During a Global Pandemic, in which the presenter will talk about what he's learned from working with older adults about social isolation, anxiety, and loneliness, and lead a discussion also about what we should take away from resilience and dealing with those kinds of things from this time of pandemic into the future, when we are hopefully not so isolated. Again, I want to thank Alan and Judy and Mary for their work tonight and their representation. Do you guys have any last words before I stop the recording and we end this evening?
Thank you for having us. This was quite an honor.
Yes, last words are not required.
Thank you very much. And we're all looking forward to having live in-person events with or without donuts. But thank you very much for hosting.
And the recording, once again, will be put up on our website, our YouTube channel in the next few days. Thanks all for coming.